Welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Axion,
I'm Sint.
and we are continuing our playthrough of Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Seasons, and our discussion of the second book of Mistborn, the Well of Ascension. Well of Ascension.
Yep. And as we usually find when we're dealing with a series, it's always fun to have to pick up in the middle of the series, especially if it's really continuity heavy, because it's not just, oh, here's a quick reset and, we'll have to start all over. It's, okay, how have our lives gotten easier / more difficult based on or in spite of the actions taken before? And they kind of took pretty big actions before that we're having to cope with. And, well, what do you do after the revolution? And this is honestly something that I think needs to be looked at a lot more, because, well, this is actually something that we are doing, right now in my actual class, because what happens after the revolution is basically Animal Farm in a nutshell.
Yeah, the call just dropped there for a second, so you'll need to repeat that sentence.
Because what you do after the revolution is basically Animal Farm in a nutshell.
No, the part before that. Because that was the part you came back in on.
Okay, I don't... This is basically, we need to talk about this more from both the English and a history perspective, because, well, this is actually something that we're doing in my actual class right now, because, well, what happens after the revolution is essentially the plot of Animal Farm.
Right.
Thankfully, it seems to be going somewhat better for Luthadel than for the Manor Farm.
That's admittedly a fairly low bar. And we'll look at Animal Farm someday. It's on the list.
When we do, we'll be sure to have BLTs, because honestly, it just gives you a craving for revenge bacon. But yeah, so I am going to make the comparison again, because in both situations, the visionary who inspired the revolution is not there to help them steer society toward the future. They have the notes and teachings left behind, but all they have is their best effort to follow that vision. Granted, Kelsier's vision is, not Marxism, but, well, there's a lot to get into with Animal Farm, and I'll probably just stop there before we start getting into what farm animal do you think Vin is, etc., etc.
I don't think Kelsier really has a specific political system that he's associated with other than not...
Anarchy?
I was about to say, other than not imperial... yeah, I guess it could be anarchy. Well, that was a dumb move.
Well, I mean, I think Kelsier tends to, prefer the Vetinari style of leadership, as long as he gets to be the Vetinari. One man, one vote. It me. Also, there's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. Where's the ATM? But, yeah, Kelsier basically brings up the second problem with this, which is not only what happens after the revolution, but, how do you follow the Visionaries Act? You have somebody who was perfectly poised to set you up for success. But either as a result of their plan or by accident, one way or another, they are not here. What do you do without them? Because, I'm trying to remember what series we were on. I think it was King Lear. I don't remember what we were talking about. I brought up Charlemagne.
Yes,
And
that was Lear.
yeah, but Charlemagne was an effective leader, and he kept the empire more or less unified without like major fractures in the foundations of his power. Then he died, and it had to be split between his 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, drawing almost arbitrary lines through existing populations, etc., etc., etc. So, exacerbating local tensions and basically setting the stage for like every major European conflict of the past millennium, more or less. So, it's not just a fiction question. This is something that actually has like in real life consequences that need to be coped with.
Mm-hmm.
So, thankfully, Kelsier did put people he trusted in charge with the expectation of action, but I don't think he ever really answered who was going to be in charge. Here's my cabinet, effectively, but who's at the moment? It is Ellen Venture, which is certainly not what Kelsier intended, because Kelsier's general opinion of the nobility is, do you want them beheaded or drawn and quartered? So there's that. Everybody else
can guess what he intended, but I don't have any actual proof.
What?
I think he just assumed... I think originally he was planning for Doxson to take that job, but that later on he just changed his status to just assuming Vin would just take control. Because, well, she's a Mistborn.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would agree with that, just because, like, even Kelsier with his very, like, laser-focused, it has to be this way, has to be this way, has to be this way, I'm pretty sure he could take a look at Vin and see, like, yes, the person who cannot stand making direct eye contact with anybody because she's so used to trying to make herself hidden, this is the ideal leader. I don't see even Kelsier being that dense. Like, he had a pretty good read on Vin. Like, she threw him for a loop a couple of times with falling in love, but I think he knew her well enough to know that, like, no, this is not what she wants. So, like, I kind of figure that if he hadn't, planned for the plan to end in his death, he would have taken control himself, and I'm not sure he would have turned out to be that much more, equitable a leader in the long run.
Yeah. No, definitely not.
Honestly, what comes to mind for me is, have you read The Hunger Games?
No.
Okay, I'm spoiling it, but I don't really care. When they do finally take over the Panem, it's debated as to, what do we do now? Let's put the citizens of the capital into the Hunger Games as revenge. I'm pretty sure that's what Kelsier would have been up for.
Yeah, that sounds right.
When you oppress a group long enough and you get somebody who's in a position to take over, a very real risk is the first thing that they're going to do is find a way to give the people who victimize them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is called a cycle of revenge, and it's for the best that Vin fell in love with Ellen, because that means they have a legitimate noble on their side to ease the transition, and a noble on their side who's very much not the type of person to do that. I mean, as we see, he builds provisions into his own constitution that allow him to be removed from power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Chelsea would have never done that.
No, Kelsier would have never done that, and while I don't think it's unfair for Tindwyl and literally everybody else to say this was a stupid decision, props to Ellen for sticking to his guns. It doesn't really help with the fact that, people are gonna die with poor leadership, but yeah. But yeah, what do you do when the revolution ends? You're no longer the scrappy rebels fighting against everything. You're not the underdogs anymore. You're in power. And that means everything is now your problem, including the multiple armies marching on your position. So, yeah. You get to hope you have the resources you need. You have to figure out how to find the resources. Something I think that doesn't get really looked at a lot is the effect of, like, taxation.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm going to go down the social studies geek rabbit hole for a touch here. Often, as a just as a shorthand for this nobleman is evil and corrupt, you'll see that they're putting the very high taxes on the peasantry, and that's wrong. And Robin Hood will come in and save the day from the vicious sheriff of Nottingham. But like, the problem wasn't that the taxes were being taken; it was mostly that like the sheriff of Nottingham was doing more than he was supposed to. It's you kind of need taxation to have a functional government. So like I think way too often fiction like this just takes the shorthand of "rar, any taxation is evil, I'm going to go drive on these government funded roads," and miss the irony entirely. But it's the moderation that needs to be looked at, not the practice. Well, the practice implementation needs to be looked at. But
Yep.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is just a case of I should not have been allowed to major in social studies ed, but here we are. And like, it's kind of unique with regard to Mistborn in that it's not really just like the money that they need. They need the specific metal of atium, which I do enjoy how often Ham tries to bring up like the economics of atium of like, scarcity creates value. Mistborns make atium more scarce by burning it for their power, for their elemental powers and duels. Therefore, atium only has value because of Mistborns, but atium becomes rarer and therefore more valuable because of Mistborns. But they need to find a very specific metal for their reserves because of how valuable it is. It's not something that they can acquire by taxing the populace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it kind of almost skirts away from the issue in a regard, while still very much acknowledging we broke what due. So yeah, as mentioned, it's about a year since It's about a year since the Lord Ruler's death, and we get to see that Elend has been managing to hold on to the throne for that time, but people are kind of chafing under the fact that, well, Tyndall easily recognizes he doesn't really behave like a king. He behaves like we're all buddies here. And, well, I think it's also kind of like a parenting metaphor in a way of like, you can't be your kid's best friend. You need to be the authority figure, and they need to know that you are this stable and reliable source of a boundary. Elend doesn't do that because he doesn't want to be a tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Finding, like, in the early days of a new system, you're going to have to struggle with, finding that balance. And unfortunately, in a time of crisis, you kind of need to err more on the authoritative side than the permissive side.
Note that's authoritative, not authoritarian.
Yeah, like, in a time of crisis, you have a scared populace that needs someone they can look to and know that they have answers and a course of action. Elend's tendency to be like, I don't know, we should discuss and vote on this. That's great in peacetime when you have the leisure of time and the luxury of being able to talk things out, but the army outside your gate does not want to wait 5 weeks for the committee to form a subcommittee on making a decision next week. You need quick action, so it's always going to be a fairly tricky balance. Let's see, then on top of that, you have to deal with, well, everybody trying to navigate the new social stratas. So with the idea that Ska are not going to be treated as an underclass anymore, like they have a presence on the council, which they've never had before, well, how well does the nobility... Great, like, actually that's one of the first things that we get out of Set and Straff Wolf. No, the Ska are going right back to how they were. They're going to be an underclass like they always were. This is the way of things. So that alone means Elend is unwilling to just surrender the city to either of them, even though Luthadel doesn't really have it in them to take on an army in an actual fight, which we tragically see played out later. They literally only get rid of the Kolos army because Vin is OP as hell, and figured out something that she probably wasn't supposed to be able to figure out.
She figured out one of the Lord Ruler's secrets, which, that's valuable stuff.
Yep. Mutual kill!
You know what? I'll take it.
So, then there's also the fact that on top of everything else being uncertain, there are the frequent assassination attempts, which are also not super uncommon with a regime change. Like, again, we're doing Animal Farm right now with my class, and, well, you can't really talk about it without talking about, like, Stalin's purges of non-loyalists. So, yeah, there were lots of assassination attempts for all over the place, and this is reflected as well in Mistborn. Like, Vin fends off so many assassination attempts, it's ridiculous. But with Luthadel being the prize that it is, of course people are going to want to take control of it. So, yeah, Elend is a prime target. He's not an Allomancer. So yeah, changing social boundaries, changing social classes, changing economic situations, changing everyone's roles, and with those roles that change in perspective. Not having the resources you could count on before, and not having the solid leadership of before, leading to, well, there's a lot of risk of uncertainty, especially when you get the suggestion that there's a spy, which they know for a fact that there is a spy, they just don't know who it is. The crew is able to still work really well together because, with very few exceptions, they worked together before for quite some time. Vin is still slow to trust because, well, it's Vin. Trust issues are, a thing.
Part and parcel of the character.
Yep. And then, well, what do you do when you get deposed? Elend does. Like, there were many, many suggestions that he just refused to step down. He fight to remain king. He doesn't. He steps down. He mopes. I mean, understandably so, but if that's your reaction, it probably doesn't reassure people over much in your ability to be a mature and responsible ruler. You know? But that does kind of get into something that's, like, honestly a paradox of leadership in politics.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, again, the, like, what do you do in an emergency? What do you do in an extraordinary situation where, as we've mentioned, time and discussion are luxuries? This is the case for, like, the entirety of the story. But do you still have your principles if you are willing to suspend them in times of crisis? This is honestly something that I think can be debated very heavily throughout history. Like, as another real-life thing, let's look at Lincoln. It is pretty heavily debated whether or not Lincoln overstepped the executive branch's authority in the actions he took during the Civil War. In hindsight, it can be argued that, well, do the ends justify the means? He kept the Union together. And those actions were taken to preserve that Union. But he did very much set the precedent that the president can expand their powers in a crisis. So, if you are someone who thinks that leadership should be less democratic and more heavy-handed, what is the benefit to not having a state of emergency wherein you can declare martial law?
Almost nothing.
Yeah. So, Elend, on the other hand, refuses to go down that road. we can see that it ends in basically disaster. Like, if he'd been more heavy-handed and authoritative from the start, there probably wouldn't have been the vote of no confidence on him. People would have seen him behaving more like a king from the get-go. He and Vin might not have been out of town when, well, okay, Saza deliberately set them up for this, but they might not have had to leave due to the situation worsening, meaning Vin would have been there and probably able to save Club's and Dox's lives. There would have been less concern regarding his ability to handle negotiations with Straff. Like, a lot of Ellen's, and therefore the novel's, problems could have been avoided. He had been less insistent on sticking to his principles of, I can't really say democracy because, like, he is king and that kind of goes against democracy. I mean, like, I don't care that it's kind of an elected position. Terminology bothers me sometimes. But the fact that he sticks to his guns for a more equitable system of government where people actually get a say and, like, are not just stuck with leadership because, well, what are you... unbirth them? They were born to be the Lord Ruler or whatever. Like... I don't know. It's not an easy answer. Nothing about politics ever really is. I mean, until it is, but let's not get too on the nose. Like, Straff and Set, obviously not here about social equality. They're not. If you are a Ska, they're not going to be great to you, but they are able to manage their governments, manage the people under them very effectively, if somewhat cruelly, especially in the case of Venture. It's not really surprising that most people in Luthadel wanted one of them to take over, because at least it's something that they're used to. There's someone making the decisions, there's a clear hierarchy or clear chain of command. Communication is critical in these types of situations, and quick, concise communication. Ellen is really happy to have a discussion with you, but that doesn't tell me what is going to be done about the armies. What can I do? How do I know my families are going to be safe? Yeah, I don't know. I think it kind of verges on the paradox of tolerance, which, again, isn't really a paradox if you remember that, like, tolerance is a social contract, but that's nothing to do with this conversation right now, and I'm kind of getting sidetracked and rambling. What do you have to say?
Not really much that you haven't already covered.
But yeah, I guess in the end, because, like, would you rather have a leader who is perceived to be weak-willed because of an insistence on equity and kindness, or an outright tyrant who does not care about you whatsoever, but projects an illusion of stability in a very unstable world?
Well,
and
that is a very relevant question nowadays, and let's just leave it at that.
Okay, I'm literally saying Elend versus Straff, okay? I'm not trying to make a real-world point!
I'm just saying.
I can't help it!
I would rather have Elend.
Yeah, and I think this again comes back to something I was saying when we were doing the summary of, like, if only everyone in the city had the same perspective that the main characters do, because we, the readers, knowing what the main characters do, know that what they're doing is, you know, the smart and right choice, but to everybody else, it just looks like, what is going on? I don't know what's happening. This is going to be a disaster. We're all going to die. It's understandable that they would have concerns and be confused. Do you not have a potion or something?
Nope.
Yay, you had a little bit. But yeah, this is also the whole like it's great for the people to have a voice. What do you do when you have like populism and demagoguery afoot? It really appeals to the base instincts of a large swathe of the population, even though on paper and just looking at someone, they're completely unsuited for the job, like Straff. Like, Straff is a power-hungry sociopath. Psychopath, I don't care, whichever. I'm not feeling like being very specific on that right now. Point is, dude ain't right in the head. Something's wrong with him. He wants to be in charge, and we're going to take the Douglas Adams approach here of he wants to be in charge, he's probably not suited for the job. Set's more upfront about it, and comes across as less cruel than Venture, but, you know, still not ideal.
Kind of like only just.
I mean, let's put it this way. Set did not go out of his way to breed a misting army.
Woo!
I know you're cheering about the victory, but it feels like you're trying to be like, yay, Set for, you know, surpassing the bare minimum.
Yeah.
So yeah, handling the revolution, following an act you can't really follow, and the paradoxes of good leadership. There's a lot here.
Yep.
And I don't really have anything else to say that I haven't already said. I'm not feeling super coherent right now.
That's a decent place to put a stop to this episode anyway. Once we get out of this cutscene. Guess I need to find a certain lake. We will continue next time. See y'all then.
Bye.